The town was small, the kind where everyone knew everyone else and life moved at a quiet, unhurried pace. In the heart of the town, tucked between a bakery that smelled of fresh bread and a little bookstore, there was a modest cafe. It was the sort of place where people came not just for coffee or tea, but to feel a moment of calm in the middle of their busy lives. Behind the counter worked a simple woman who rarely drew attention. She had soft eyes and hands that moved with care, whether wiping tables or pouring tea. She never wore makeup or fancy clothes, and her hair was usually tied back in a practical bun. People often overlooked her, assuming she was just another face in the background of their small town. Yet beneath her quiet demeanor, she carried a secret. From a very young age, she had loved music. She had been given a violin by a teacher who saw her potential when she was barely able to hold it properly. Her fingers were clumsy at first, and her notes often squeaked or faltered, but she had persisted. Late at night, after the cafe closed and the town had gone to sleep, she would sit by a window, the violin resting under her chin, and practice. Sometimes the wind would catch her notes and carry them into the empty streets, a gentle whisper of her talent. She never performed in public because she did not seek attention or praise. Music was her private world, a place where she felt free, strong, and alive. One sunny afternoon, the town held its annual festival. Colorful banners hung from the lampposts and stalls lined the main square, selling everything from handmade jewelry to honey from nearby farms. The aroma of roasted nuts and fried pastries mixed with the faint smell of flowers from the small gardens around the square. The simple woman had come to the festival as she always did, more out of habit than excitement. She preferred quiet corners, watching children chase each other with balloons, listening to laughter, and sipping lightly sweetened tea from her cup. It was during this festival that a group of local elites noticed her. They were people who held influence in town, known for their wealth and their sharp tongues. When they discovered that she could play the violin, they immediately saw an opportunity for amusement. "She can't be very good," one of them whispered with a smirk. "Why don't we get her to play for us? It will be fun to see her squirm." They laughed at the idea, imagining a tiny woman struggling with a violin, perhaps making a few wrong notes. For them, it was not about music but about spectacle, a way to entertain themselves at someone else's expense. The woman heard the whispers, though she tried to ignore them. She felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. She had never performed in front of an audience, let alone one that might be mocking her. Her hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as she thought of the possibility. Yet she also felt a quiet, stubborn resolve. She had worked too long and too hard with her violin to allow fear alone to dictate her actions. But still, the thought of stepping onto a stage, of being watched by a crowd, sent chills down her spine. Before she could respond, the group had gathered a small audience. They approached her, speaking in a tone that was almost playful but carried a sharp edge beneath it. "Come on, why don't you play a little for everyone? We're all waiting," one of them said. The crowd began to gather, curious and eager to see what would happen. Children stopped running to watch. Merchants paused their work, and even the performers at nearby stalls slowed down to see the event. The atmosphere shifted from cheerful festival energy to something heavier, a tension that pressed down on her like a weight. She glanced around, seeing the faces of people she had served countless times in the cafe. Some smiled politely, others looked confused, and a few held a faint curiosity. She could feel their eyes on her, the silent expectation almost palpable. Her stomach tightened, and she wondered if she could actually do it. Her violin rested in the case by her side, its familiar weight a reminder of all the nights she had spent practicing alone. She took a deep breath and opened the case. The violin, worn but well-loved, seemed to hum softly in her hands, as if encouraging her to play. The crowd began to chatter, some whispering, some snickering, imagining the performance they expected would be clumsy and amusing. She felt a flicker of irritation at their assumptions, but she quickly pushed it aside. This was not about proving anything to them, she reminded herself. It was about the music, the notes she had carried in her heart for years, waiting to be released. As she lifted the violin to her chin, she closed her eyes for a brief moment. The sounds of the festival, the laughter, the shouting, the music from other performers faded into the background. She focused only on the strings beneath her fingers, the way her bow felt in her hand and the melodies she had dreamed of playing. Her fingers found their place almost instinctively, moving with the precision and confidence of someone who had practiced countless times in solitude. The first note came out, soft and tentative but pure. It hung in the air, catching some of the curious ears in the crowd. A few of the onlookers tilted their heads, surprised that the sound was not awkward or squeaky as they had expected. Encouraged, she played another note, then another, the melody beginning to take shape. Her heart beat fast, but not with fear. This was excitement. The kind that comes from doing something you love and have worked hard to achieve. The mocking group watched, their smirks slowly fading as they realized this was not going to be the show they had imagined. The simple woman, who they had assumed would falter, was playing with skill, her notes clear and beautiful. She was no longer the timid cafe worker in their eyes, but someone commanding attention through the music she produced. Her bow moved gracefully, each string responding perfectly to her touch, creating a sound that was rich, warm, and filled with emotion. The crowd grew silent. People stopped whispering, stopped moving, and simply listened. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. The children who had been playing with balloons sat down cross-legged on the ground, mesmerized. The merchants leaned against their stalls, the smell of roasted nuts forgotten as the melody wrapped around them. Even the local elites who had come to mock her could not deny the talent that was unfolding before their eyes. She continued to play, her anxiety replaced by a sense of flow, a connection with the music that seemed to lift her above the festival, above the laughter and the chatter. Her mind was clear, and for the first time she felt fully seen. Not as a simple woman behind a cafe counter, not as someone to be mocked, but as a musician capable of touching hearts. Each note carried her own story, her years of practice, her quiet determination, and her love for the violin. As the song drew on, the sunlight glinted off the violin, highlighting the smooth wood and the careful scratches that told of years of use. Her hair, tied back simply, swayed slightly with the movement of her bow. She did not notice the tears forming in the eyes of some listeners, nor the sudden shift in expressions from disbelief to awe among the crowd. She only felt the music, pure and honest, flowing through her and into the world around her. When the last note lingered in the air, there was a moment of silence so profound it felt almost sacred. The festival, the chatter, the laughter, it all paused, held in the space left by her music. The crowd slowly began to clap, softly at first, then with increasing warmth and admiration. The applause was genuine, not the laughter or teasing that had been expected. People were smiling, some wiping away tears, some exchanging amazed glances with one another. The simple woman lowered her violin, her chest heaving slightly, not from fear now, but from the exhilaration of sharing something so personal and powerful. The local elites, who had tried to turn her into the subject of ridicule, were now speechless. Their smirks had vanished, replaced by an awkward awareness that they had underestimated her. They exchanged glances, unsure of what to say, realizing that the simple woman they had intended to tease had done something far beyond their expectations. She had not only played beautifully, but had also captured the hearts of everyone who had listened. She packed up her violin quietly, the applause still echoing around her. The festival continued, but it was different now. People spoke in hushed tones about the performance they had just witnessed. Some lingered near the cafe, hoping for another glimpse of the woman who had amazed them. She returned to her usual spot behind the counter, smiling softly to herself. Inside, she felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense that her private world of music had touched something real in the hearts of others. No one could take that moment away from her. The simple woman who had once been overlooked had shown that talent and dedication could not be ignored. She had faced mockery, fear, and expectation, and had emerged with her skill shining brighter than anyone could have imagined. The memory of that day would linger in the town for a long time, a reminder that sometimes the quietest people carry the strongest voices, and that true art can never be diminished by ridicule. After the festival, the simple woman returned to her quiet routine at the cafe, but something had changed. The memory of the music she had played lingered in her mind like a gentle echo. Even as she served coffee to familiar faces and wiped down tables, her thoughts kept drifting back to the notes, the melody, the way the sound had carried through the square. It had been the first time she performed in public, and though it had been unexpected, it left a warmth in her chest that she could not ignore. Word of her performance spread quickly through the town. By the next morning, people were talking about the simple woman who had stunned everyone with her violin. At first, she tried to ignore it. She was used to staying out of the spotlight, content with her small, quiet life. Yet as more people stopped by the cafe to compliment her, to ask if she might play again, she felt a mixture of pride and unease. Pride for the music she loved so dearly, and unease because she had never sought attention. She was a private person, and the sudden recognition felt almost uncomfortable. A few days later, a small letter arrived, hand-delivered by a young boy who often helped around the square. The envelope was simple, and inside was a note inviting her to play at the town's cultural hall. It was an official invitation, polite and encouraging, suggesting that her talent should be shared more widely. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the words. She had never imagined performing in such a formal setting. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. She was no stranger to hard work, to practice, to music, but the idea of stepping into a larger, more formal audience made her stomach tighten. For the first time, she began to consider her own abilities with seriousness. She realized that the performance at the festival had been something more than a one-time event. It had been a revelation. She had discovered not only the power of her music, but also the courage within herself to share it. And now, with the invitation in her hands, she faced a choice. She could decline, stay in the comfort of her cafe and return to the quiet life she knew. Or she could accept, embrace the opportunity, and face the possibility of fear and failure head-on. After a night of thought, she made her decision. She would play. Not for anyone else's amusement, not for recognition, but because the music was a part of her. It lived inside her, and she could no longer ignore the need to let it be heard. The next morning, she began to prepare. Her violin, carefully polished, sat ready beside her. Sheets of music, once folded and tucked away in drawers, were spread across the table. She traced her fingers over them, remembering every lesson, every late night, every note she had learned and practiced. Each movement brought back memories of quiet rooms, of patience, and of the joy she had felt in discovery. She knew that preparation was about more than just the notes. It was about presence, about connecting with something larger than herself. She practiced for hours each day, sometimes pausing to close her eyes and feel the music resonate within her. The notes were no longer just sounds. They were expressions of her own experiences, her dreams, and her fears. She imagined the audience in the cultural hall not as critics or spectators, but as people who could feel what she felt through the music. Each practice session became an intimate conversation, a sharing of her inner world with an imagined listener. The anticipation grew as the day of the performance approached. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but it was different this time. The nerves were not about fear of being mocked, but about the desire to do justice to the music she carried. She adjusted her posture, tuned her violin carefully, and walked through the pieces again and again, seeking perfection, not in the eyes of others, but in the satisfaction of her own standards. Every note she played felt alive, and every mistake she corrected was a small victory over doubt and insecurity. On the morning of the performance, the simple woman felt a strange mixture of excitement and calm. She dressed in plain but tidy clothes, the kind that allowed her to move freely and feel comfortable. She carried her violin carefully, its familiar weight a source of reassurance. As she walked to the cultural hall, the street seemed fuller than usual. People she knew nodded and smiled, offering quiet encouragement. Some stopped and asked if she was nervous. She nodded but did not speak much, letting her mind focus on the music. Each step brought her closer to a moment she had both feared and longed for. Backstage, the hall was buzzing with activity. Musicians tuned their instruments, organizers checked schedules, and assistants hurried with last-minute details. The simple woman found a quiet corner, placing her violin case carefully on a chair. She closed her eyes and took deep breaths, imagining the strings under her fingers, the bow gliding across them smoothly. She allowed herself a small smile, thinking of all the nights she had spent practicing in solitude. Those quiet nights had prepared her for this. Every note she had played alone had led her here, and she could feel the connection between her past effort and the present moment. Time passed slowly. The hall filled with people, the chatter of anticipation buzzing in the air. She could hear footsteps, the rustle of programs, and the occasional cough. She reminded herself to stay grounded, to focus on the music, to let it flow naturally from her heart rather than her mind. She opened her violin case once more, checking the strings and the bow. Everything felt right. She drew her bow across the strings softly, listening to the gentle hum, letting it calm her. The hall's energy shifted, moving from busy preparation to expectant silence. When her name was announced, a hush fell over the crowd. She walked onto the stage, her step steady, the violin resting under her chin. For a moment she looked out at the audience, seeing rows of faces turned toward her. She felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but it was accompanied by determination. She lifted her bow and played the first note. It rang clear and true, filling the hall with a sound that was both strong and delicate. The audience leaned in, and she felt the room respond to her music. The melodies were familiar, practiced countless times, but they now carried a weight and depth that came from her heart. She played with focus and emotion, the notes flowing seamlessly from her fingers. Every movement was deliberate yet effortless, as though the violin itself were an extension of her being. The crowd listened, captivated, as the simple woman transformed the stage into a space where sound spoke louder than words. The mocking laughter from the festival was gone. Here there was only reverence, curiosity, and a growing sense of wonder. People whispered to each other, sharing looks of disbelief and admiration. They had expected a timid, uncertain performance, but what they heard was skill, expression, and soul. As she played, she felt a connection to every person in the hall. The music carried her emotions directly to the audience, evoking memories, feelings, and unspoken thoughts. She noticed people closing their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, feeling the story within the notes. Children sat quietly, mesmerized, and adults leaned forward, captivated by the unexpected beauty. Even those who had doubted her, or who might have once looked down on her, were now silent witnesses to her talent, moved in ways they could not have anticipated. She allowed herself to forget the world outside the hall. There was no fear, no judgment, no expectation other than her own. Each note she played was a conversation between her and the music, and through the music with the audience. She felt an incredible sense of freedom, a liberation she had never experienced before. Her fingers moved swiftly and accurately, her bow gliding smoothly, creating a sound that was both powerful and tender. It was as though every practice, every quiet night, every moment of doubt had been leading to this. When she finally lowered her bow, the room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and some even whistling. The simple woman stood there, breathing deeply, feeling a mixture of relief and exhilaration. She had faced the fear, embraced her talent, and shared it with the world in a way that was true to herself. The recognition was overwhelming, but she allowed herself only a quiet smile. She did not seek fame or attention. She had shared her music honestly, and that alone was enough. The organizers came forward, congratulating her, asking about her future plans, and suggesting other opportunities. She listened politely, answering softly, but she felt no rush to make decisions. Her heart was still full of the music she had just played, and she wanted to savor the moment. Backstage, she carefully placed her violin back in its case, feeling the familiar comfort of its weight. She knew that this performance, like all the others, had been more than notes on a page. It had been a connection, a bridge between her inner world and the hearts of the audience. After the performance, as she walked home through the quiet streets, the town seemed different. People looked at her with a new awareness, a respect that had been absent before. She carried herself with the same modesty, yet there was a newfound confidence in her steps. Inside, she felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that she had never allowed herself to feel so openly. Music had been her refuge, her private joy, and now it had become a gift she could share with others without losing herself. She returned to the cafe the next day, greeted by familiar faces. People asked her to play, told her stories of how her music had moved them, and thanked her for sharing her gift. She smiled softly, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The simple woman who once shied away from attention had discovered something essential, that courage and passion, when combined, could turn fear into something beautiful. And though the town had begun to see her differently, she remained grounded in her simplicity, knowing that the music was hers first, and the admiration of others came second. After her performance at the cultural hall, the simple woman returned to her quiet life, but she could not ignore the ripple her music had created. People spoke of her everywhere, from the bakery to the market to the park. Even strangers stopped her on the street to ask if she might play again. She listened politely, smiled gently, but remained hesitant. She had never sought fame, never imagined being the center of attention. Yet the music she loved so much had begun to pull her into a world she had never explored. The next event was not planned by her. It came as a surprise. One afternoon, a local group organizing a town concert asked her to perform on the main stage. They insisted it was only for fun, a small piece of the event, but she could sense the curiosity in their voices, a subtle mixture of challenge and admiration. The thought of stepping onto an even larger stage filled her with apprehension. She had performed for a hall full of people, yes, but a stage under the open sky, surrounded by hundreds, maybe even 1,000 eyes, felt completely different. She considered refusing. She wanted to stay in her safe corner of the world, serving tea, wiping tables, and enjoying her music privately. But as she sat quietly at the cafe, her violin resting beside her, she realized that the music was calling her. It was no longer about the audience, about recognition, or about applause. It was about the music itself. It was about letting her emotions flow freely, letting her heart speak through the strings. She had learned something important. She could not hide her talent and passion forever. It would always seek its way out like water finding its path through rocks, so she agreed. The days before the concert were spent in quiet preparation. She practiced diligently, refining every piece she would play. Unlike before, when she had been nervous and uncertain, she now approached the violin with a calm confidence. Each note was deliberate, each pause carefully placed. She imagined the audience in front of her, not as critics, not as challengers, but as people who could feel the depth of her music. In her mind, she created a story for every song she would play, a journey that would lead listeners through her world. The night before the concert, sleep came reluctantly. Her mind replayed melodies, finger positions, bow movements. She could hear the notes as clearly in her imagination as she could on her violin. She realized that the music had become part of her identity, inseparable from who she was. It was not about performing to please others or to prove anything. It was about sharing the part of herself that had been hidden for so long. The thought brought a mixture of fear and excitement. She knew she would face an audience again, one much larger and more varied than before, but this time she felt ready to embrace it. When the day of the concert arrived, the town square had transformed. Tents lined the streets, colorful banners fluttered in the wind, and the scent of food mingled with the warmth of the afternoon sun. People moved in every direction, some heading to food stalls, others to games or small performances scattered around the square. At the center of it all stood a large stage framed by speakers and bright lights. She approached it slowly, her violin case in hand, feeling the familiar weight of it, a comforting reminder of all her years of practice. Backstage, the energy was intense. Musicians checked their instruments, sound engineers adjusted equipment, and performers rehearsed last-minute details. She found a quiet corner, placing her case carefully on a chair. She closed her eyes, listening to the sounds around her, the chatter, the footsteps, the distant laughter. She let her breathing slow, focusing on the rhythm of her own heart. The violin rested in her lap, familiar and grounding as she envisioned the music flowing through her fingers and into the world. The moment came quickly. Her name was called, and she stepped onto the stage. The crowd erupted in applause and cheering, a sound that made her chest tighten with emotion. She raised her violin and took a deep breath. The first note rang out clearly, cutting through the noise of the crowd, a pure and confident sound. The people quieted almost immediately, drawn into the music as though a spell had been cast. She played with precision, but also with a tenderness that seemed to speak directly to the hearts of those listening. As the performance continued, the crowd's initial curiosity turned into awe. Some leaned forward, mesmerized. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Children stopped running and sat on the ground, captivated by the unexpected beauty. Even those who had doubted her talent, who might have once teased or mocked, were now silent, unable to look away. The simple woman once overlooked was commanding the attention of hundreds with nothing but her music. Each note was a story, each phrase an emotion carefully shared with the audience. She allowed herself to be fully present in the moment. Her fingers moved swiftly across the strings, her bow gliding effortlessly. The melody rose and fell, sometimes soft and intimate, sometimes strong and commanding, reflecting the depth of her emotion and the skill she had developed over years of practice. For a while, it felt as though the rest of the world had disappeared. There was only the violin, the music, and the connection it created between her and the audience. The performance reached a point where the music seemed to take on a life of its own. The simple woman, usually quiet and reserved, became a vessel for something larger, something that could not be measured by applause or recognition. The audience was no longer simply listening, they were feeling. Hearts lifted, emotions stirred, and even the wind seemed to carry the notes across the square. People who had come for a casual afternoon of entertainment found themselves moved, unexpectedly, by the sheer power and beauty of her playing. As the last piece came to a close, she allowed the final notes to linger in the air, holding the silence for a moment before lowering her bow. The square erupted in applause, louder and more fervent than anything she had ever experienced. People stood, clapped, whistled, and cheered. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were exchanging stunned glances. The simple woman who had once tried to remain in the background stood at the center of a wave of admiration and amazement. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear now, but from the intensity of emotion that had flowed through her. The organizers and fellow musicians approached her, offering congratulations and praise. She thanked them quietly, her voice soft but steady. She did not feel pride in the way others might, not a desire for fame or accolades. Instead, she felt gratitude for the music, for the years of practice, for the courage to step forward and share her gift. She realized that the audience's reaction, as overwhelming as it was, did not define her worth or her talent. The music itself, the journey she had taken with it, was what truly mattered. As she packed her violin back into its case, she noticed small groups of people lingering near the stage. Some wanted autographs, others wanted to speak to her about the performance. She smiled gently and spoke softly, encouraging them to follow their own passions, to embrace the talents they might be hiding inside. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her music had touched lives, inspired emotions, and perhaps even sparked dreams in others. The festival continued around her, but the woman felt as if she were in a separate world, a space created by her music and the hearts it had reached. She walked slowly through the square after the performance, taking in the sights and sounds with a sense of calm awareness. People nodded, smiled, and whispered to one another, still amazed by the unexpected depth of her talent. Children ran past, holding balloons and laughing, yet they seemed to carry a sense of reverence, as though they had glimpsed something extraordinary. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, she returned home. The quiet of her small apartment welcomed her, and she set the violin carefully on its stand. She sat by the window, letting the fading light spill across the room, and reflected on the day. She had faced fear, embraced her gift, and shared it with a world that had once overlooked her. The applause, the admiration, and the amazement of the audience were not what mattered most. What mattered was the music itself, the journey, the expression, the connection she had created. For the first time, she realized that her talent was not something to hide or to fear showing. It was a part of her, an essential expression of her identity. The simple woman who had once moved quietly through life unnoticed had discovered a power within herself that could touch hearts, inspire emotions, and transform moments into something unforgettable. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it, and she had discovered that true skill and passion could never be diminished by doubt or by those who sought to belittle it. That night, as she rested, she allowed herself to dream. She imagined new melodies, new performances, and new opportunities to share her music. She thought of the people she had touched and the emotions she had evoked, but above all, she felt a sense of peace. She had embraced her music fully, and in doing so, she had embraced herself. The simple woman who had once been quiet, overlooked, and underestimated was now a force of beauty and inspiration, not through loud words or grand gestures, but through the simple, honest expression of her heart, through the violin. The next few days after the concert were unlike anything the simple woman had ever experienced. The town, which had once overlooked her, now seemed to hum with curiosity and admiration. People she had known for years approached her in the streets, at the market, and in her cafe. They spoke in hushed tones about the performance, about the way her music had filled the air and touched their hearts. Some were shy in their praise, others more enthusiastic, but all shared the same sense of wonder. She tried to carry on as usual, pouring tea and serving pastries with her familiar calm. Yet she could not ignore the change in the atmosphere around her. Her music had left an impression, and the town seemed to see her differently now. It was strange to feel noticed in such a profound way without ever seeking it. At times she felt uncomfortable, like a character who had stepped into a story meant for someone else. But she also felt a quiet pride, a satisfaction that came from knowing she had shared a part of herself honestly and fully. Invitations began to arrive from near and far. Local events, small gatherings, and even a few neighboring towns wanted her to perform. Some suggested private recitals, others public concerts. She listened politely, weighing each request carefully. Her instinct was to remain grounded, to continue her life quietly, but a part of her also wanted to explore the possibilities her music could create. She realized that sharing her talent was no longer optional. It had become a calling, a responsibility to the music itself. One afternoon, she received an invitation to play at the town's annual celebration, a larger event than any she had attended. The main square would be filled with hundreds of people, and she would perform in front of everyone. Her heart fluttered at the thought. She was no stranger to public performance, but the scale of this event was daunting. Still, she knew that she could not refuse. She practiced diligently, preparing every note, imagining the crowd and visualizing the music flowing effortlessly from her fingers. Each rehearsal strengthened her confidence, allowing her to feel more at ease with the attention she was about to face. The day of the celebration arrived. The square was alive with activity, filled with laughter, music, and the scent of food from various stalls. Children ran with balloons in their hands, families gathered to watch performances, and friends met to share stories. Amid the noise and movement, the simple woman walked quietly to the stage, her violin in hand. The familiar weight of it offered comfort and reassurance. She felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement, a tension that had become almost familiar. Backstage, the energy was intense. Performers adjusted their instruments, checked costumes, and ran through final rehearsals. The simple woman found a quiet corner to center herself. She closed her eyes and focused on the violin, letting the memories of her practice sessions and previous performances guide her. Every note she played in her mind was a reminder that she was ready, that the music had prepared her for this moment. She reminded herself that the performance was not about impressing others, but about expressing the depth of her passion and sharing it honestly. When her name was announced, a hush fell over the crowd. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the stage, curious and expectant. She stepped forward, lifting her violin carefully to her chin. For a moment, she took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the presence of the people before her. The first note rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the chatter of the crowd. Silence followed, as the audience leaned in, captivated by the unexpected beauty of her music. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, her bow gliding across the strings with effortless skill. The melodies flowed naturally, each note building on the last, creating a story that the crowd could feel but not put into words. People listened intently, drawn into the performance. Children paused in their play, adults stopped their conversations, and even the organizers and performers backstage seemed to pause and listen. The music was no longer just sound. It was an emotion, a connection, a force that carried through every corner of the square. As she continued to play, she noticed the reactions of the audience. Faces softened, eyes glistened, and whispers of admiration spread among the crowd. The music seemed to bridge the gap between performer and listener, creating a shared experience that transcended words. People who had come casually to the celebration found themselves caught up in the power of the performance, moved in ways they had not anticipated. The simple woman, who had once been overlooked and underestimated, now held the full attention of hundreds, and yet she remained grounded in her own calm presence. The music swelled, rising and falling like waves, carrying the audience on a journey through quiet moments and dramatic peaks. Her bow danced across the strings, each movement precise yet full of emotion. The crowd responded instinctively, leaning closer, swaying with the rhythm, and absorbing every note. The woman felt a deep sense of connection, as though the music were a language everyone understood. Her own emotions flowed through her playing, and the audience received them with open hearts. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but for the joy of music itself. Every note, every pause, every flourish of the bow carried a piece of her story, a reflection of her dedication and passion. The simple woman who had once doubted her ability to perform in public had discovered the true power of her talent. She realized that music was not just a skill to be admired. It was a gift that could touch lives, change perspectives, and create lasting memories. The performance reached its climax, a section of music that was both powerful and tender, demonstrating the full range of her skill and emotion. The audience was completely absorbed, their attention held entirely by the sound and the story it conveyed. Some held their breath, not wanting to break the spell, while others closed their eyes, letting the music speak directly to their hearts. Even the most skeptical observers were moved, unable to deny the beauty and depth of the performance. When the final notes faded, the square erupted in applause. The sound was overwhelming, a mixture of admiration, gratitude, and amazement. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes. The simple woman lowered her bow, her chest heaving slightly from the intensity of the music and the emotions it had stirred. She smiled softly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had shared something precious and had received in return a connection that was far greater than she had ever imagined. The organizers and fellow performers approached her, offering congratulations and praise. She thanked them quietly, her voice gentle and sincere. She felt a mixture of humility and quiet pride, knowing that the performance had been a true reflection of her dedication and love for music. It was not about fame or recognition. It was about the power of art to bring people together, to create understanding and to evoke emotions that words could not capture. As she packed her violin back into its case, she noticed small groups lingering near the stage. People wanted to express their admiration, share how the music had affected them, and ask about her experiences. She spoke softly and kindly, encouraging them to pursue their own passions and to nurture the talents that lay within them. She felt a sense of purpose, knowing that her music had inspired others even in small ways to follow their own dreams. The celebration continued around her, but she moved through it with a quiet grace. Children ran and played, families shared food and laughter, and the town thrummed with life. Yet she felt as though she were carrying a different kind of energy, a sense of fulfillment that came from knowing she had shared her gift fully. Her music had left a mark on the town, one that could not be erased or forgotten. People would remember the day she played, and they would remember the emotion she had conveyed through every note. That evening, as the sun set and the square emptied, the simple woman walked home reflecting on the day. The applause, the admiration, and the astonishment of the crowd were gratifying, but what mattered most was the music itself. She had faced fear, embraced her talent, and shared it with the world in a way that was authentic and true. She had discovered the power of courage and persistence, and she had learned that true skill, when combined with passion, could create moments that touched lives deeply and permanently. Back in her apartment, she placed the violin on its stand and sat by the window. The town lights glimmered in the distance and a sense of peace settled over her. She thought of the people who had listened so intently, who had felt the emotion behind the music, and who had been moved in ways words could not express. She felt gratitude not for recognition, but for the opportunity to connect with others through her art. The simple woman, once overlooked and underestimated, had found her place in the world, not through power or wealth, but through the honesty and beauty of her music.